Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is a webinar sponsored by the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, TOPP, and NOFA Mass. Laura Davis will be presenting on soil amendments for organic farms. And just a real quick bio for anyone who has not met Laura yet. She is a soil technical assistance and certification assistance provider with NOFA Mass, as well as our TOPP coordinator. She has also been involved with NOFA Mass for years and years on our board of directors and has and operated a certified organic farm for over 10 years in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And so I'll just pass it off to Laura right now so we can get started on the presentation. Thank you again for joining.
Hi, everybody. Laura here. Thanks for joining us on your lunchtime. Really appreciate it. One of the things that always comes up when people are thinking about transition is what type of amendments they can use. So that's why we wanted to have this presentation. In April, we'll redo this presentation, but at that time, it will also be translated into Spanish. So we hope that you'll forward that to any of your networks. I'm going to dive right in and talk about the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. This is a USDA National Organic Program which is national in scope. We are part of the Northeast region, and farmers who plan on certifying organic can be matched with a certified organic farmer for 1 year at no cost to them. And we do pay the mentor farmer for that service. The technical assistance that's also provided will help the farmer in the organic certification process. And I actually work with farmers who are transitioning on their organic certification applications to make sure that they understand everything in it. So please, if you are interested in signing up as a mentor or a transitioning farmer, you can use that link at organictransition.org. I'm going to start out with some regulations first. I know that's always fun for people, but you'd be amazed at how many folks are certified organic that don't read the standards. These are some of the most important standards. Most people think that organic certification simply means that no synthetic chemicals are used. But in fact, there's a large soil practice standard that is part of the organic regs. So I just want to read these to you. The blue highlighted reg is the one that we're going to actually be talking about today, but there could be many workshops on the other topics. So an organic grower must maintain or improve physical, chemical, which is what we're going to talk about with amendments, and biological conditions of soil and minimize soil erosion. They must also manage crop nutrients and soil fertility by using rotations of crops, cover crops, and the application of plant and animal materials. And the producer must manage plant and animal materials to maintain or improve soil organic matter. So the producer may manage these crop nutrients by using amendments. And so that's where we find ourselves today. If we look at that regulation on the website, we would actually see, whoops, sorry about that. We would actually see that the amendments regulation is quite long and boring looking. But when we get down to the producer may manage crops and nutrients and soil fertility under D section here, there's a lot of descriptions about soil amendments and the type of soil amendments that you can use. And it can sometimes be confusing. So it's important if you are certifying organic to always understand that your amendment that you're using, even before you purchase it, is compliant for organic farm use. On a minor or not so minor, but the producer must not use any fertilizer that is a synthetic substance or that is included on the national list. And the national list is a list of synthetic substances that organic crop producers can use. And of course, sewage sludge is not allowed. Okay, this chart is an example of what you might see on an organic farm plan. That's the application that a farm would use to apply for organic certification. And so one of the things you need to be sure of is that those amendments are compliant. The last thing you want is this as a catastrophic problem, using something that's not compliant and then having to take that field out of organic production for 3 years. That is something that nobody wants, and you have to avoid at all costs. The organic system plan, as a first step, will be reviewed by a certifier. And they will actually look at the list of items that you list in your chart of fertility inputs and make sure that those are compliant. And of course, that would be a red flag, and they would let you know that these are not compliant. They will tell you whether or not you are compliant with the regulations or not. They won't tell you what to use. They're not allowed to consult with you. But me as an educator, I can help you and consult with you in this manner. So this would be a listing of for example, of items you might use on your farm. The product, elemental sulfur, the brand is Tiger Organic. And ARP, this area is where most organic farmers who are filling out an application for organic certification get wrong. A means approved, R means restricted, and P is prohibited. P are the ones you never want to use because that would set you back 3 years. So it's important. How do you know if it's A or R? Most people don't. The best way to find out is to search omri.org, omri.org. And we can actually do that little test right now and show you how it works. There's a little search bar at the top. And I'm just going to put in sodium nitrate. And then you will see the results. Okay. This particular first one that says sodium nitrate, that's a different flag than the US. So that's not one that we want to pay attention to. The next one has the US flag. That's one we should pay attention to. And you'll see it says R. That means it's restricted. That means it's not simply allowed, but it's allowed with restrictions. So that would be an R on your organic farm plan. So what is the restriction? Well, Chilean nitrate or sodium nitrate is a little complicated because it was restricted, and then the National Organic Standards Board decided that they wanted to make it prohibited, and then they didn't make a final decision, and now it's in limbo. So, but one of the key things that you want to look at is what that restriction says, and make sure you follow it, because the farm plan will ask you, how are you going to follow this annotation? Restriction and annotation, we kind of use in similar terms. Okay, so that's OMRI. It's going to be your best friend as an organic grower. Companies who make fertilizers pay OMRI to study their product and tell them whether or not they can use the OMRI logo. Some bags of fertilizer that you get from suppliers may not have the OMRI logo. That doesn't mean that it's absolutely prohibited or not approved. You will need to do a little more research and make sure that you're working with your certifier. They can be your best friend in this type of situation. Okay, so that's OMRI, and you'll want to make sure that you fill out the AR appropriately. Compost may seem like an innocuous item to add to your soils, but you want to make sure that that compost is not prohibited. There are some out there that contain synthetic substances, which set you back 3 years on your transition. Okay, so there's a question in the farm plan: how do you comply with the annotation for R fertility inputs? That's kind of the last column of this chart that you'll see in the organic system plan. And you'll need to make a note. And sometimes they'll refer to a regulation, 205, 203, or 205, 105. And then you'll need to look that reg up to make sure that you're following that restriction. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of the regulations say that organic grower must improve the organic matter of the soil. Well, you have to start somewhere. So a soil test is going to be required for you to submit with your organic certification. And then it can be monitored from the baseline. The purpose of also a soil test is really to look at your mineral deficiencies. And you don't want to waste a lot of money on fertilizers if you don't need them. So you should address those ones that are limited or deficient. And that's really what the soil test is going to tell you. Years ago, I was a big fan of Organic Gardener magazine. I'm sure many of you remember that, that Rodale published, and they recommended you put on compost every single season. The problem is if that compost had manure in it, most of those soils have very high phosphorus content. And not only is that an environmental risk, but also it can lock up other nutrients. So we don't want to just put on fertilizers and amendments because that's the way we've always done it. You want to make sure that you are strategic about using fertilizers that are for minerals that your soil is deficient in. And again, organic matter is something you should be monitoring. If it goes down from year to year, there's obviously something that needs to change in terms of your practices. Perhaps you're not doing cover crops. Perhaps you're tilling too much. Those are items that can reduce organic matter. Okay, so this is a soil test that we look at, and we're going to turn to organic matter for a second. And so I'm just going to use this number right here, this 5.75 organic matter from this soil test to show you how to calculate nitrogen. Now, we're not going to calculate all minerals today and all amendments because that would take us hours and hours. But I do want to show you nitrogen because most people believe that organic growers don't need nitrogen. But soil organic matter does determine how much we're going to have. And if we don't have enough organic matter, especially if we're just transitioning from a conventional practice, you may not have enough organic matter there to supply the amount of nitrogen that the plants need. So that's an important consideration. Okay. Conventional growers rely heavily on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And if they're transitioning, they have to move over to something else. And the important thing there is as you transition to organic, build up the organic matter, you'll need less of that conventional fertilizer. The organic matter percentage is what we want to look at. Now, I circled back on the last report, the 5.75. That's 5.75%, which is the organic matter in that sample field. Generally accepted that under dryland conditions, the soil, Mother Nature can create about 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre. If it's an irrigated field, then around 15 pounds per acre. If there was a previous legume cover crop, then the soil can create as much as 20 pounds per acre. And if there was crop residue incorporated, then it could be as much as 25 pounds per acre. So all of these are practices that could help grow your organic matter and your ability for Mother Nature to supply the nitrogen. So I use a handy little calculator for this, which is helpful in looking at the amount of fertilizer I need. So I'm just looking at this 5.75, and I'm using 15 pounds per acre because I have irrigation. And that means I'm going to get approximately 86.25 pounds of nitrogen. Now, if I'm growing tomatoes, cabbages, onions, potatoes, peppers, or squash, I'm going to need around 140. This is a table that's from the New England Vegetable Guide, which I highly recommend you look at for how much nitrogen a crop might need. And you're going to get credits for your legumes and credits for your crop residue. And so it's taking our Mother Nature 86 pounds of nitrogen and subtracting it from the 140, and it's giving us credit for legumes and residue, crop residue, and telling us that we're going to need 43.7 pounds of nitrogen. Then we can look at some of the organic amendment sources of nitrogen, which I have listed over here on the left. Now, I generally like to use amendments that are standalone. That means that it's usually 1300 or 1302. Because my soils don't need a ton of phosphorus. And if yours don't, then you should think about using an amendment that has 0 phosphorus in it. Okay, so Nature Safe and Feather Meal have about the same. I could use either one of those. I've got Nature Safe listed here. So I've just basically going to move that 400 number until I get close to this 44 pounds of nitrogen. And then I will know approximately how many pounds of nitrogen I'm going to need. Okay, so that's pretty close. I need 360 pounds of Nature Safe, which has 13% nitrogen in it, to give me 47 pounds of nitrogen. And that's for 1 acre. Now, if I have less than 1 acre, and let's just say I had a 1/4 acre, I would just multiply the 360 times the 1/4 acre, and I would have a total of 90 pounds. So this is something to think about. I mean, if your organic matter is 10%, you may not need a supplemental nitrogen, but you have to read your plants. Oftentimes, if we have heavy rains, nitrogen and potassium are the first things to be washing through, and you may need to side dress nitrogen and or potassium for that reason. But if you're going to want to continue to watch your organic matter and make sure that you have enough nitrogen to supply your crops. Okay, so I know that we're getting into a lot of detail here, so I wanted to just give a nice photo here, and photo credit to Big Train Farm in Rhode Island. This is a beautiful example of some cover crop that they had in a small greenhouse area. This is what we call a green manure that will be either left as mulch or tilled into the soil. I believe this is a no-till farm, so I'm pretty sure they're just leaving it on as mulch, and they'll let that die back and plant directly into it. It's a really good example of what organic farmers do to increase the organic matter in their soils. Okay, so after we think about the nitrogen, these are just, I'm looking at these were all on our chart or on our calculator. There's different amounts of nitrogen in each nitrogen fertilizer, depending upon the quantity that you need. If you remember back on that example, we needed 360 pounds using a 12 or 13% nitrogen amendment. And some people will say, well, can I use alfalfa meal? Well, sure, you can use alfalfa meal, but you would need to have about 5 times the weight in order to get the same amount of nitrogen. So these are all considerations for you to think about. Sometimes people don't want to use an amendment with any animal products in it, and then you'd want to choose something like soybean meal or peanut meal. So that would be another choice. Other folks like to use fish. Fish doesn't have near the nitrogen in it, so as a main nitrogen source, it's not going to give you, you'd have to use an awful lot of it to give you what you need. But it does make a really good side dress and foliar spray. Okay, when we look at a soil report, the very first thing we look at to amend is magnesium. Magnesium is one of those minerals, of the main minerals: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sulfur, phosphorus. These are the main big minerals. When I say big, they're in large quantities in the soil versus the micronutrients that are in very small quantities in the soil. But if you are looking, the reason we start with magnesium first is there's very few magnesium amendments that we have options of. The main one really is, or the main two are dolomitic lime, which has 13% magnesium, also has calcium, and sulfamag and or K-mag, which has 11% magnesium. Some people do turn to Epsom salt as well. This is magnesium and sulfur amendment, which can be used, but the top two really are some of the go-to amendments that organic growers use when they need to supplement for magnesium. And the next biggest mineral that we look at is calcium. And the reason we look at calcium is because that's calcium is one of the main amendments that we use, not only to supply calcium, but also to increase pH in the soil. Now, the sweet spot in pH is between 6.3 and 6.5. The reason that is, if you look along this line here, right under 6.5, that's where the depth of all of these mineral lines are the widest in combination of each other. So at 6.5, the maximum amount of these minerals and micronutrients will be available to the plant. So that's generally why we think about adjusting the pH. So if we are adjusting the pH, there's a couple of different things that we can do as organic growers. If the pH is above 7, generally 7.2, 7.3, we generally recommend elemental sulfur, which is 90% sulfur. That will enable the pH to come down to a level that would make other minerals more available to the plants. When we want to raise pH, we need, except for maybe blueberry growing, if the pH is below 6, you're going to want to bring that up. And there are two ways to do that. Well, actually, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but mostly people use a high calcium limestone if they already have enough magnesium, because that has a low magnesium content. If the soil is deficient in magnesium, we use dolomitic limestone, which contains both calcium and magnesium. Again, we need to be careful about adding magnesium because it's hard to reverse it and sometimes can make the soil a little bit tight. If we look at our soil report and the pH is good, it's in the sweet spot, but we still need calcium, then we need to use a calcium that is not going to affect pH. And we generally look at these types of amendments: aragonite, carbonatite, gypsum, or even a liquid calcium that won't change the pH. Okay, so these are some of our calcium amendments that organic growers use. High cal lime is about as basic as we can get in terms of limestone, but there are companies out there that make it in such a way that make it no longer approved for organic use. So it's really critically important that we check to make sure the limestone, the brand name and the limestone that we're buying and using before we buy it is approved for organic use. So that's the best way to do that is either to look at OMRI or to check with the certifier. I know that I have, ordered limestone from a local supplier and, told the crew that once it got here, it needed to go on. And I got home before they put it down, and thank goodness, because it wasn't the brand that I had requested. And had they used the brand that they sent me, we would have had to take that field out of organic production. So it really isn't critical in all instances that you make sure your amendments are compliant. Aragonite, oyster shell, crab shell, all of these are really good calcium amendments. Gypsum, if you also are in need of sulfur, which most Northeast soils are. Gypsum is a really good calcium amendment. Bone meal, but also has some phosphorus in it. So if your soils are high in phosphorus, I wouldn't recommend bone meal or calphos or rock phosphate or bone char. Only if your phosphorus levels are within range should you be using those. I would choose some of the other ones for your calcium when you don't. So the top two, if you need to adjust pH up, aragonite, oyster shell, crab shell, gypsum. If you are needing calcium and don't want to increase the pH, and then these others, bone meal, calphos, rock phosphate, bone char, are nice products to use, but make sure you need the phosphorus in your soil, and your soil test will tell you that. Okay. Can too much manure be too much of a good thing? I think the photo credit has to go here to Cricket Creek Farm up in Williamstown. I couldn't find the name on the photo, but I'm pretty sure this was from Susie Konecki years ago. Yes, if the soil needs to be regenerated, cow manure is probably one of the best things, or manure made out of cow manure, compost made out of cow manure. But too much of a good thing can really affect other nutrients and lock them up. So let's just talk about P for a second. Phosphorus definitely can be, I would say 95% of the soil tests that I see every year, which is about 100, are all have excessive P levels. So it's a problem that everybody has. And so if P is needed and you have low phosphorus levels, then you could use manure. You want to make sure that you are following a organic process for using manure. Generally, in your notebook, you would write down, I spread manure, November 1st, and I plan to plant there in that same field on field A, tomatoes, and my first harvest is not expected until the end of July. Those are the types of records you would keep as an organic grower when you're using manure. The compost made with manure, you want to make sure, as I said, that that doesn't have any synthetics in it. There is compost made in Massachusetts that has synthetics in it that should be avoided. Organic growers need a manure statement from the farm that is giving them the manure. For example, it could be an email from a farmer. I'm supplying cow manure to XYZ farm. I pile it for a year. I do not spray it with anything like fly inhibitors or anything like that. It's made up of bedding from the winter, and that's all. So that's the type of manure statement that if you're getting manure, horse manure, cow manure from a local farm, just for organic growers, you need to have this statement as part of your records. And of course, no sewage sludge is allowed, and just be careful of bagged compost that might be sold that could be a product of sewage sludge. These are prohibited items, and also can have PFAS in them. So you don't want to be using or getting anywhere near that type of a product. MDAR does regulate P for most non-ag use, but that doesn't mean farms should over-fertilize with P. It's especially if they're near water. We have to be careful of that. And again, if you need to add phosphorus because your soils are low in phosphorus, manure and compost are a good choice. Bone meal is also, bone char, calphos, rock phosphate, crab and fish meal. They have lower levels of P that could be used to bring the phosphorus up. It's an important ingredient, but it is one that we need to be careful of. Again, I'm showing pictures to make this more exciting than just dry amendment discussion, because cover crops are so important to organic growers. This particular field is oats and peas, and it was seeded with an earthway seeder. And this picture was taken November 16th. It's a nice tight planting. There's probably about 12 rows of seed on each of these beds. And this now has died off and is a detritus covered bed that could be planted directly into with transplants. If it's direct seeded, then you would just rake the detritus to the side and seed. Okay. The next thing, as we move on to other type of amendments, you'll notice that we're talking about micronutrients. Micronutrients are generally on a soil report that are represented in parts per million. We can convert those to acres by just multiplying the number by 2, and that becomes pounds per acre. We also call these items trace elements because they're needed in such small amounts in the soil. There's a lot of debate about micronutrients and trace elements. You will find folks that believe that there's no accepted level of micronutrients, but there's a lot of good experience with micronutrients, and boron and manganese in particular are very important. Boron synergizes with calcium and enables things like beets to size up. So if you're low on boron, your beets are not going to, generally, they don't like to size up as much. And what we have found with micronutrients is that for organic growers, they are not approved simply products, they are restricted. And so you need to show a soil test, a leaf or sap test, as part of your organic dossier to show that you are deficient in micronutrients before you can use them. So that's really important. But I would say that unless you've been applying lots of cow manure compost on your soils, you're probably deficient in most of the micronutrients. Those types of soils can be high in zinc in particular, and you would not want to add more than a certain level. If you don't want to worry too much about individual micronutrients, you can use something like kelp meal or azomite, which are sort of broad spectrum trace element amendments. And they're a lot easier to apply than worrying about, each individual micronutrient. We do work quite closely with Advancing Eco Agriculture, and they have about 10 years of experience applying granular versus liquid micronutrients. And they will tell you that liquid micronutrients are more available to the plant, and they can have a greater impact on plants. Oftentimes when they have used dry ingredients for many years, they don't see a change on the soil report. But when they use the amendments as a foliar spray and use it liquid, they see a direct correlation impact to in the plant sap. And so that is the recommended way that they believe that we should be applying micronutrients. So foliar spraying, which is, spraying a micronutrient mixed with water from a backpack sprayer, is a good way to apply micronutrients. Liquid kelp could also be used as a foliar spray instead of worrying about the individual micronutrients. Okay, I guess, one of the more important amendments, if you will, because biology is not often in all of our soils. When I first started farming our field, we had no earthworms, and it was a pretty sad sandy soil. And it takes a long time if you plant cover crops, continuously every year, maybe even twice a year. Put compost on, reduce your tillage, reduce your disturbance, cover with natural mulches. It still takes time for that biology to come up to speed, especially if that soil has been farmed on a conventional basis. The biology will come back, but I think that one of the things that I've researched is, as conventional farms transition, some of the facts that people talk about are, well, in year 5 of transition, organic farms can have the same yields as conventional. And those are farms that don't increase the amount of biology or add biology. Again, if you talk to a company like Advancing Eco Agriculture, they will tell you they've never seen a farm that's transitioning have reduced yields because of the fact they deliver biology. So I think this can make a really big difference, especially for farms that are transitioning. You need that balanced biology in order for those microbes to make the amendments and the nutrients available to plants. This is the basic difference really between conventional and organic growers, is that you're feeding the soil instead of the plant, making the soil one that has lots of bacteria in it. So many of you have heard about the soil food web. It consists of millions of bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and more, and they eat each other, and they eat organic matter, and then they poop it out, and the nutrients are available to the plants. I mean, it's a really amazing science that happens underneath our feet. When soils are deficient in biology, it doesn't matter how well balanced our minerals are. You need that biology to make the nutrients available to the plants. So with that in mind, the soils will really benefit from adding biology to seed, soil, and the plant. So this is a picture many of you have probably seen before. It shows the different levels of the microorganisms, and one's eating the other, and they're making the nutrients available. This is actually a picture of some microbes in the soil. This is probably at 400 magnification. But all of these little tiny dots are bacteria. We have some fungi here in these long threads. I think one of our microscopists just joined, and they can tell me what the big circle is. But this is really what we're looking for, is a biologically active soil. And it does take time, as I mentioned, to get to this point, but you can help it along. Okay, so let's think about inoculants. And I think that there's, okay, so I think maybe I'll take a couple of questions here while we're waiting. And I think that Annie is right. I skipped the potassium slide. And let me just go back quick and look at that. Oh, there's the potassium slide. Sorry about that. One of the main potassium amendments is potash of sulfate, or also called potassium sulfate. It has the most potassium of all of the other amendments. It does also have sulfur, which most soils are deficient in. So this is a really good choice for anytime you need potassium, which is, many soils do need potassium. It seems like every year, between the amount of rain that we've had, and potassium gets washed out pretty quickly. Sulfomag or K-mag is another one. Green sand, kelp meal, these are all potassium amendments, but they are lower amounts. So you'd have to use, and green sand has a lot of different minerals in there as well. Wood ash I would use sparingly. There is some good data out there about wood ash from Maine about using wood ash. It does increase pH, so you need to be a little bit careful about it. Has a lot of calcium in it, but you want to keep that amount to lower levels. So apologize for missing that potassium one. Okay, so let's talk about inoculants. And there was a question about tight soil. Tight soil, what I mean by that is it's not compacted from depth-wise, but I had actually a couple of beds that were overdone with magnesium, and even to pull weeds out by hand was difficult because the soil was so tight. There was no air space. There was no place for water to go down. I'd call it compaction, but it wasn't like a depth compaction. It was more of a soil tightness that I was referring to. And okay, so we'll move on to inoculants, and then we'll take a few questions as well. I honestly would not plant a seed without a mycorrhiza fungi inoculant. I have seen how my plants thrive. I've used it for 13 years. It's just, it really helps. I even can add a little bit into the transplant water when I'm transplanting. Without it, I notice a substantial difference because a lot of soils are missing mycorrhiza fungi. And they're really important to plants, most plants. Brassicas don't synergize with mycorrhiza, so I don't necessarily use it on my brassica seeding, but I use it for everything else. Most people are used to using a legume inoculant, a rhizobium bacteria that is put on pea and bean and seeds. And it's really helpful if your soils don't contain a lot of rhizobium. So this is something that's an accepted practice, but I think also mycorrhiza fungi should also be something that everybody utilizes. Soil inoculants, there are lots out there. OM1 Spectrum, Organic Micro 5000, or others. These have beneficial bacteria that you can apply in water. And so I like to use one of these items in my transplant drench. So I have, a 4.5 gallon water bucket. I use maybe an 1/8 of a teaspoon of inoculants in there with some food like liquid kelp or some sort of fish hydrolysate when I'm actually transplanting. So that works really well to inoculate the entire bed, and it's a 300 square foot bed. And we actually do that a second time in the fall, but instead of in a watering can, we use a backpack sprayer. We call that the fall primer. So we use the microbes in the backpack sprayer to spray all of the cover crop that's there. If there are any bare beds that maybe had Brussels sprouts on them, we would spray the soil and the Brussels sprout plants, whatever's in the bed at that moment. This is usually done like around the 1st of November. And it enables those microbes to continue to work all winter long and make the nutrients available to the plants in the spring. And I'm a firm believer in that as well. The past couple of years, vermicompost or worm castings have been very popular. I think that they are a magical way to inoculate our soils, even by using a handful in a tomato hole or using it in seeding trays. I like to make compost tea with it, along with some liquid kelp and some fish hydrolysate. And I use that compost tea to put my inoculant in before I'm transplanting. So there are just lots of ways to add. And it over several years, it's amazing. I mean, I used to have, as I mentioned, no earthworms, and I have tons of them now. And we can actually look at this biology under a microscope and see the difference between a soil that is thriving and has a community of microbes versus not. And the plants notice it too. There's a huge difference. It is important for organic certified growers to make sure that any inoculants that they're considering using be not non-GMO. That would be a prohibited, GMO inoculant would be a prohibited amendment. Okay.
So
So
if you are open to taking questions now, or there's a couple questions in the chat, or we can hold them till the end of the presentation. I'll leave that up to you.
I think that I can do, yes, let's do this last slide and then we can take some questions. And then I can move on to the record keeping, which is going to be pretty important.
Okay.
Okay, and other amendments people might use, they might make their own preps. They might use some Korean natural farming recipes. They might use some biodynamic preps. If you're a certified organic grower, you just need to make a list of the recipe and then check each item that's in the recipe on omri.org. If there's one that's a question, your certifier can help with this. They can do a lot of research. If an item is not OMRI, doesn't have an OMRI approval, it's very possible that they can do the research for you and help you with that compliance. If the ingredient or fertilizer does not have the OMRI logo, don't just dismiss it. It could be that it can be approved depending upon if it's a synthetic or not. But always do this before you purchase. Okay. So before we go on to record keeping of your amendments and other records for organic growers, I'd like to go ahead and take some questions.
So one question in the chat is, would charged biochar also successfully fulfill the role of introducing biology?
Yeah, if you're inoculating the biochar, yes.
And then another question is, how does the biological health of soil impact the amount of nitrogen to be added, given the increase in uptake with healthy soils? So does good biology require less nitrogen?
Yes. There's a lot of microbes that do that work. So as you increase your organic matter and your biology, you're going to find you need a lot less nitrogen.
And then the last question in the chat for now is if we have a recipe for making mushroom compost soil.
Yes, if you have a recipe for mushroom compost, list out the materials used in that compost, and you can look each one up individually and come up to a determination of whether or not that whole recipe is going to be organic compliant. So that's a good way to do it, is just look at the list. Just like you were making regular compost, there is a organic production standard for making compost. If you're utilizing that standard, you could use that compost on your beds during the growing season. If you're not using that, process and the compost has any manure in it, then you need to treat it like manure and use it in the fall and make sure you have 90 to 120 days in between the harvest on that field. But yes, you could definitely look at the ingredients in the mushroom compost. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go on to record keeping. This is one of the areas that I always hear people talking about. Oh, I'm not going to certify because it's too much record keeping. Well, I do think that there are records that need to be kept, but I think that most businesses that that are either farmers or other type of businesses have to keep certain records. So I thought I would go through just some of the records that are important for you to keep, just to keep in mind. Some of you on the phone are already certified. Some of you are applying, but record keeping is really, really important. And as you get inspected by your certifier, that will evolve as they come and say, oh, you're missing harvest data. or you didn't record your harvests when you were harvesting. It's okay. You can make that improvement. It's an iterative process. You're not going to lose your certification for that reason, but they will expect you to improve that and start keeping your harvest records. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do, and I know you've got seed invoices coming in the mail right now, and from last fall and through today, keep one file of all of the invoices of amendments and your organic seed together in the same file for 2024. And that way, everything's together. When the inspector comes, they want to see your purchases of amendments and organic seed, you can just hand them the file and they can look through it. It's easy peasy. You want to retain those records for at least 5 years. For tax purposes, it's 7, but for organic certification, it's 5. You want to record the application of amendments or inputs with field ID or name, the date, the amounts you applied, and to what crop. This is also required by conventional growers, so this is not a huge difference because they have to keep records of all of their inputs as well, and so forth. I think it makes a lot of sense to have this on a Google Doc. I use a Google Doc for my crew, and we write on there exactly what is going to be used. Let me just go to last year. Okay, so last March in our greenhouse, this is what we would have applied: 3 pounds of sulfamag, 8 pounds of potash, 7 ounces of soluble ore, 60 pounds of calphos, and so on. So in our greenhouse, that's the name of my field, and that's the date, and that's the amount I applied. This is where I would put all of my records, the plan for the week, and it makes it really easy to search when the inspector is there and you're a little nervous and you want to find something quick. So this is how I do it. I think it makes sense because the crew can access it from their phones. They can make notes on there, and the plan becomes the actual achieved, and it gets updated at the end of the week. Okay, so the Google Doc makes it easy. Your production records are probably already on separate files. So you want your seed invoice or who you bought the seed from. You want to make sure you have a seeding date, a transplant date, how much row feet or square feet you're planting, a harvest date. Whoops, I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that. Let's see. I guess we rebooted there. Laura,
I can share the slides from my computer if you'd like.
I think I'm okay now. Okay, there we go. So production records, harvest date, harvest records in pounds or inches, sales records. So when the inspector comes, they do an audit trail, and they will say, okay, let me see what you sold at your farmer's market last Saturday. Show them the sales records. Okay, I see you have tomatoes on here. Show me how much you harvested of tomatoes when you harvested these tomatoes. So you're going to show them the harvest record saying you harvested 100 pounds of tomatoes, on Friday, the day before the market. Then you're going to say, okay, well, how much had you planted? And also, what was the transplant date? What was the seeding date? And then show the inspector the seed invoice. This is a complete audit trail from seed invoice to sale. That's what's going to be required at an organic inspection. So you're going to want to make sure you have these particular records. The other item that most farmers know that they can use non-organic seed if they can't find organic seed, but you have to write down your search for organic seed. You want to check at least 3 companies, write down the company name, and record the date, the catalog, the site you looked at, and what it is you're looking for. So if you're looking for purple cauliflower, and you checked Johnny's, you checked High Mowing, you checked Fedco, on a certain date, that's going to be written down. And then if you can't find the organic seed, you go ahead, make sure that seed company has signed the Safe Seed Pledge and that seed is not coated with something that's not compliant. And then you can order the purple cauliflower that's not organic. Okay, organic certificates are something that the farm would receive once they're certified. So if you're selling to a grocery store or another business, they're going to ask you for proof that you're certified. So you would give them that organic certificate. This is an example of an organic certificate of a company that I have bought from, Strictly Medicinals, which is on the Northwest coast. There's a lot of dates on organic certificates, but the one that you care about is the issue date. Okay, so this issue date, this is a fairly recent certificate, so it was issued on February 13th of 2024. And I know that I can buy seeds from this company that are organic, or plants. They sell a lot of medicinal plants. The plants I can buy from them for 18 months after this issue date. And if I get to past 18 months of this issue date on this certificate, which would be August 13th of 2025, I would need to get an updated certificate if I'm going to order from them after August 13th of 2025. Otherwise, I would not be compliant. So keeping these, I like to just bookmark them because some of these companies will have them on their websites. Some of them you have to request, and some of them may send you an expired one, and you have to be smart enough to know that they've sent you a expired one, because maybe that customer service rep doesn't know the drill. Okay. Let me close this down and move on. We're just about done here. Okay. So organic transition timeline. If you own or manage or rent a growing area for 3 years, and you will want to record inputs and crops each year, and you're not using any prohibited substances for 3 years, then you are eligible to certify. The land can be certified when no prohibited substances have been applied for 3 years. There is an option for newly purchased land if you know the prior manager or owner, and they will attest and sign an affidavit that nothing prohibited has been used on the land. So there's options for that. If you are recently a new farmer, this is a great way to give your customers confidence that you are growing organically. You technically cannot use the word organic on any of your collateral or marketing materials unless you are either less than $5,000 in sales and you consider yourself exempt, which is allowed. But you also have to follow all of the rules and do all the records as well. You just would not have to apply for certification. But it is important for you to understand that in this new year, March 19th of this year, there's a new reg that's going into effect called the Strengthening Organic Enforcement. And the National Organic Program never had people in this role to handle this sort of thing, but they do look at websites, they do look at posts on Facebook and so forth to see if a farm is marketing themselves as organic, and they will be in touch with you. And it's not a position I would want to put anybody in. They do mean business, and they do want you to be certified, but they don't want you to use the word organic unless you are certified. So just something to be cognizant of. this is the field history sheet. If you are thinking about certifying, this is the sort of the first step to look at whether or not you've been not using anything prohibited for the last 3 years. 2024 would be what the plan would be for cover crops, what inputs you're going to use. And then you'd have to do the same thing for the prior 3 years. If you are the manager, you would sign off. If you were not the manager, then if you're able to find the manager or the owner of the land, and they can attest to not having anything prohibited use in the last 3 years, you could be eligible sooner than waiting the 3 years. But that would have to be worked through in terms of this analysis. Okay, and in ending, I just want to say that NOFA Mass does do technical assistance. They do soil health technical assistance, as well as I do help farmers and food processors navigate the organic certification process. And that's something I'm doing with all of our top mentees right now in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And so I welcome you to look at some of these tests. We do, if you have a test, we'll just do the analysis and organic recommendations. If you want to go to the website and get a soil test, we do utilize Logan Labs, but we will analyze a UMass soil test as well. The biological assessment is pretty special in that we have a few microscopists on our staff that will take a soil of your sample and look at it underneath the microscope to tell you if you have life or not. We also have something called a soil health assessment, which is on farm, that takes place where somebody, one of our soil technicians, comes to the farm, digs a hole, does a bunch of different testing with you so that you can really understand the health of your soil. So those are options for you. So I think we only have a few minutes left for questions, so I'd like to go ahead and open it up. You can either put questions in the chat, or you can come off of mute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, this is Murray. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, William.
Hello there. Question regarding the use of gypsum in old wallboard. I've looked at technical data sheets for a couple different suppliers of wallboard products to see if I could understand whether or not the gypsum in wallboard would be appropriate. Have you ever come across anybody trying to leverage old wallboard as a supply of gypsum?
I have not, but I would be happy to do some investigation for you and get back to you on that.
I know it's a very, very specific question, but I've got a lot of it, and I was wondering whether or not I should just throw it or retain it for future use.
Does it have paint on it?
No.
No. Okay. Let me do some investigation and I'll get back to you. I know how to find you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions, or did I scare everybody off? Oh, that's a good question, Jody. I'm not sure if OM1 is different than EM1. I think they might be made by the same company. Do you know, John, by any chance, about OM1 and EM1?
I don't believe so. I don't know really what OM1 is, to be honest with you. But I don't think that's a product made by Terraganics, which does make EM1. There's also another company that does make an EM1. I mean, they're all basically, microbes that are functioning effectively. But I don't know what OM1 is. Never heard of it. Thanks.
We'll have to figure that out, Jody. Thanks for your question. I also want to just say that UMass Extension is one of our partners at NOFA for the TOPP program, the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, and they have a whole series of workshops that they will be doing. They've done one and they have another 6, I think, for this year. So definitely look those up on our, they're on our website and they're on the Extension's website as well. Microscope, can we recommend a microscope for soil analysis? Yes. Yes, we can. John, are you still with us? Can
I am. And if you want to email me, I'll give you my email. I can send you a recommendation for like bare bones bright field microscopy. And I will put in a little plug too. I'm working with Monique Bosch at the moment, and we've got some microscope classes that are going to be rolling out. It's not going to be a one and done thing. This is something that we'd like to do seasonally so that, you know, we can get them in times when people aren't so busy. But if you are interested in learning how to use the microscope, stay tuned, because you're going to see lots of things that NOFA Connecticut and NOFA Mass will get going on. But anyway, my email address is duke.john@verizon.net. It's pretty straightforward, and I can send you a little cut sheet about what you'd be looking for in a microscope.
And that class, by the way, is that's being done by CT NOFA, includes a microscope with the class cost. So that might be a good opportunity for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura.
And Laura, there was another question in the chat too, from Claire Bowen. I usually use UMass for soil tests. Anything specific out of the ordinary I should test for?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Claire, for asking that question. I think that you definitely need to order the organic matter, which is a separate charge on the UMass tests. So if you have that, you should have, it's only another $6 on top. So their total price is probably like 28 or something like that. But definitely get the organic matter part of that test. I also want to urge people to fill out the evaluation form. And I think that Annie put it into the chat, and that was a slide I didn't show you, so I apologize for that. But can you, let's see, there's a QR code that you can scan also to give the evaluation. And again, if you want to sign up for TOPP, you can go to either as a mentor or as a transitioning farmer, organictransition.org.